Date unknown. They tell me I'm in a hospital. They tell me I've been here 3 days. They tell me I have a concussion. They tell me bruised ribs hurt more than broken ribs. They tell me I was in an explosion. They tell me the theater exploded. They tell me the reason for the explosion is unknown. They tell me it's buried under a zillion tons of rubble. They tell me it was probably a gas explosion. They tell me it happened around 6 in the evening. They tell me the theater was empty at the time. They tell me no one ever lived there. They tell me this is a ridiculous idea. They tell me they won't dig up a zillion tons of rubble. They tell me no bodies would be found. They tell me no one has been reported missing. They tell me no one has tried to visit me. They tell me no one has called except Father Lufra. They tell me I talked to him the day after the explosion. They tell me I forgot this because I have a concussion. They tell me I talked to him yesterday. They tell me I forgot this because I have a concussion. They tell me this condition will, almost certainly, pass. They tell me I may someday remember the explosion. They tell me I may never remember the explosion. They tell me I'll fly home as soon as I'm strong enough. They tell me I may be strong enough the day after tomorrow. They tell me all my belongings are in the closet. They tell me they brought them from my hotel room. They tell me all my notebooks are intact. They tell me I shouldn't be looking at them now. They tell me I shouldn't be writing in them now. They tell me I shouldn't be getting excited now. They tell me I shouldn't be worrying now. They tell me I shouldn't be thinking now. They tell me I should be resting now. They tell me I should be taking it easy now. They tell me it's time for an injection. I tell them I need to keep my notebook. They tell me my notebook will not get lost. I tell them I need to remember what I've written here. They tell me it'll be right here when I wake up. They give me the injection. I start taking it easy. Date unknown. It appears that this was actually written by me. Date unknown. I, Jared Osborne, write this down for Jared Osborne for when you wake up in the middle of the night, as you seem to do, and you don't know where the hell you are. The preceding pages, beginning, "They tell me I'm in the hospital," were also written by me for when you wake up in the middle of the night, but I don't remember writing them any more than I will remember writing this the next time I wake up in the middle of the night and find it sitting on the table beside the bed. Date unknown. This is a concussion. That's what you have to get fixed firmly in your head. You have a concussion, and for the time being, your long-term memory is out to lunch. We hope it's for the time being. All of us Jareds who read and write in this notebook. The doctors who patiently tell us their names every day, and that we regularly forget every day, assure us that this very probably is a temporary condition. May 31st. Apparently I sleep a great deal. I have no idea whether it's for hours or for days. Now when I wake up, I reach automatically for this notebook. I don't remember what's in it, but I do remember that it has the answers. I think the idea is, even if my long-term memory never returns, this notebook can serve as a kind of cumulative record. I've collected a lot of information in the last hour, which should put down here. To begin with, I'm back in the United States. I keep wanting to say we, meaning the Jared who is writing this entry, and all the Jareds who will read it in days to come. I'm at what seminarians used to call the company farm, which is where you go when you need a little rest, or a little vacation from booze, or the whispers about you and the altar boys are beginning to get a bit noisy. All the big orders have them, of course some of them have several, thoughtfully specialized. Naturally they're not called penitentiaries anymore. Nowadays they're called retreat centers. This one is located in the rolling countryside about 100 miles south of St. Jerome's. I found this out by picking up the phone on my bedside table. Apparently I always do this. Tim, the young man who answered, I don't know that he's young, but he sounds young, told me to read the entries in my notebook, and I told him I'd already done that. Then he told me where I was, that I'd been here for 2 days, that it was 2 o'clock in the morning, evidently my favorite time for calling, May 31st. What he calls the accident happened about a week ago. If he's right, then the explosion must have occurred Saturday, the day Sheeran was scheduled to speak at the theater. But Saturday seems impossible in light of what I recorded that they first told me, probably in Radnau. If it happened on Friday, I wouldn't have been there since I was planning on a good night's sleep after spending the day in the park with B. Therefore, I conclude that it probably happened on Sunday. Tim knows nothing whatever about the explosion except that I was pulled out of the rubble and was reportedly deemed lucky to be alive. I asked him how to get an outside line and was told I'd have to talk to Dr. Emerson about that. I told him I just wanted to call my mother and let her know I'm alright, but he'd said I'd have to talk to Dr. Emerson about that. I asked him what other kinds of patients are in this ward, and he said I'd have to ask Dr. Emerson a question like that. I asked him if he could send someone in to talk to me, and he said it was the middle of the night, and he'd come himself, but he had to stay at the desk. I asked him if I could come find him, and he said this would not be a good idea at this time of night, but he'd be glad to talk to me as long as I wanted, on the phone. I asked him if this is like a regular hospital, and he said no, not really, because there's no one here with, diseases, like cancer, pneumonia, or appendicitis. This is more like a nursing home, he said. I asked him if he could make a call for me, and he said only if Dr. Emerson okayed it. I asked him if I'd had any visitors, and he said he was pretty sure I hadn't. I asked if any visitors were expected, and he said there might be, but he wouldn't necessarily know about it very far in advance. I asked if anyone was asking about me, and he said, oh sure, they call every day to see how you're doing. I asked who that was, and he said he didn't know. I said I was surprised they'd moved me from Germany. He said, well, you don't have any problem functioning, you know. You just forget you've done it. Like now. Everything you're saying makes sense, but when you wake up in the morning, you probably won't remember saying it. You're not unconscious or anything, you just forget. Like you've forgotten that we've already had this conversation 3 times. We've talked about all this 3 times before? Twice last night, and this is the 3rd time. I don't think I'll forget this time. Good, I hope not. That's what you said the last time, though. I told him I'd tie a string around my finger, and he laughed. He laughed, but he doesn't know the really funny part, which is that there is already a string tied around it. Saturday, June 1st. Morning. All the same, when I woke up, I remembered that conversation with Tim. I've lost a week, almost to the hour. I had to wait until noon to get in to see Dr. Emerson, who is pretty much what I pictured him to be, and pretty much what I suppose he has to be to run a joint like this. Old enough to be authoritative, but not a senior citizen, unflappable, unimpressible, unsnowable, unmovable, but perfectly friendly and willing to hear you out. I said I wanted to talk to Father Lufra, and was surprised to learn that Father Lufra was expected to arrive at the center today in time for dinner. Like Tim, Dr. Emerson knew nothing about the accident. When I asked for permission to call Germany, he asked who I wanted to talk to. I was prepared for the question and offered him a piece of paper with 3 names on it. The incredible truth is, I don't know Sheeran's last name. We were never formally introduced, and there was never a moment where it would have been appropriate to ask. I know Michael's last name, to hear it, but it could just as easily be spelled Dzerzhinsky or Dzerzhinsky as the way I heard it. Dzerzhinsky. Without a first name, Frau Dr. Hartmann was unfindable, so the 3 people named on the list were Monica and Heinz Tito, and Gustl Meyer, the owner of the leftovers shop Uberbleisbin. Dr. Emerson glanced at the names and observed that it must be the middle of the night in Germany. No, actually, it's just mid-evening, the best time to call. Do you speak enough German to deal with the operator? When I said no, he did something that impressed the hell out of me. Without a moment's hesitation, he picked up the phone and started punching buttons. Within 60 seconds, he had the German country code, the Radnau city code, and had exerted enough force of will to get himself an operator who spoke English. When he had the numbers, the operator asked him if he wanted to be connected, and he said yes. Try Gustl Meyer. When there was no answer there, the operator tried the Tito's number. When the phone was answered, Dr. Emerson asked if this was Monica Tito. Evidently, the answer was yes, because he shoved the phone at me. I said, Monica, is that you? This is Father Jared Osborne. We met in the basement of the theater. Oh, yes, she said. What do you want? It was just as uncordial as it looks, I said. I'm calling from the United States. You know I was in the explosion. Yes? Monica, I'm trying to find out what happened. The theater was exploded. I know I was there, but I was hit in the head and I don't remember anything. What I'm trying to find out is, was anybody down there and... The phone was set down with a clatter. I waited through a painful minute until I heard the receiver being scraped up again. Everyone is dead, Monica said. What? No! I asked Heinz and he said everyone is dead. But I was told the theater was empty. I heard her say here, and another voice came on the line, Heinz's. What do you want? He said. All are dead. No, Heinz, I was told the theater was empty. Who tells you this? I was told this in the hospital. They said no one was looking for bodies because the theater was empty. Yeah, so? They tell you. Do you know that Sheeran was there? I heard a muffled exchange between the two. I hang up now, Heinz said. No, wait. Can you tell me Sheeran's last name? Her surname? Heinz thought for a moment before saying, You should be there too. Then he hung up. Afternoon. I spent the next 3 hours in bed, and the thoughts I thought don't need to be recorded here. Around 4 o'clock, some being knocked and made his way in and introduced himself chummily as Father Joe. He wanted to know if he should schedule a spot for me in the chapel. I said, What? Tomorrow's Sunday, Father, he said to me. I assume you will be saying Mass. I will not be saying Mass, I told him. Father Joe disappeared, as if whisked off stage like a puppet on strings. So at least that much has been settled. I've reached and passed the 50th degree of losing my faith. Evening. Tim, my middle-of-the-night confidant, is a Native American built along the lines of a sumo wrestler. This is a summer job for him. During the school year, he's a student at junior college in a town nearby. Not having eaten all day, I was starved, and he directed me to the dining room, which I took one look at and decided I couldn't stand right now. Too bright and too much conversation that people would want to include me in. I went back and asked Tim if I could get a tray sent over, and he said sure, nothing easier. I told him I was expecting a visitor from St. Jerome's University by the name of Father Lufra, and he asked how he'd be arriving. I told him I supposed by car. Tim looked through his papers and asked if he'd be spending the night. I assume so. He shook his head. I don't think so, he said. They're pretty careful about letting us know this stuff, and there's no Father Lufra down here. He's expected for dinner. Tim shrugged and repeated that he didn't think so. I went back to my room, and with nothing better to do till my tray arrived, decided to take stock and see how many of my belongings had gone south while I was going west. Amazingly, except for my billfold with all my cash and credit cards, every last thing seemed to be there, including my passport. I called Tim, and he confirmed my suspicion that the billfold was under lock and key in the office, for safekeeping. The item of greatest interest was the tape recorder, which had a tape in it that had been run forward an hour or so. After I'd eaten and returned the tray, I rewound the tape and hit the play button, mentally crossing my fingers and holding my breath. The first second confirmed my hopes. It was a tape of Sheeran's speech at the theater on May 25th. I stopped the tape to consider the fact that if Heinz's Tito was right, these would be the last words I'd ever hear from her. The thought did me no good one way or another. I pushed the play button and listened.